Hello, welcome to the GSK Supply Exchange webinar today. I can see a few people have started to join. I'll just wait a couple more minutes before we get going, and we'll be back with you in about a minute or two. Okay, so let's get started. Hello everyone, my name is Tom. I am one of your community managers on the GSK Supply Exchange. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on a business proposition for energy efficiency projects. Just to remind you, this is the first of 5 webinars over the next couple of months where we'll be walking through the journey of carrying out an effective energy efficiency program right from the start to getting the business case signed off, to behavioural change, reporting and maintaining momentum on the project. And we'll be closing the series with a run through of an example of successful energy efficiency project which we've carried out for a client. In addition to these webinars, I'll also be uploading some supporting guides and documents to help you, which will be made available through the exchange. Today, we are joined by Louise Wallis from Schneider Electric's Energy and Sustainability team. As a bit of background to Louise, she originally has a background in business management and she works within Schneider Electric's Energy and Sustainability team. During her time here, she has supported the delivery of metering and data services for clients, and she now looks at energy and sustainability in a more focused manner, specifically working with clients on all aspects of energy efficiency and energy management. Before we start, I just want to remind you that the presentation is about 20 minutes and there'll be about 5 or 10 minutes at the end to answer any questions you have. If you would like to ask a question, then please could you submit it via the chat function on your panel at any point throughout the presentation. Also, if you have one after the webinar, please do feel free to email them to me and I'll get back to you. We'll also be uploading this webinar to the Supply Exchange so you can watch it again at a later date or share it with colleagues. Just before we start, I want to remind you that GSK does not endorse Schneider Electric or any other third party. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Louise to start the presentation.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. So hopefully some of what we're going to look at today will resonate. So we're going to start with, just bear with me a second, slide to move on. There we go. So we're going to start with looking at some of the basics in terms of why it's important to build a business case for efficiency. So firstly, I'll try and give a little bit of context around that. Then I can share some of the challenges that we've seen when talking with some of our customers. And finally, just give you a bit of information around what we've identified as some of our key learnings. I think it's safe to say that most people have a level of understanding in terms of the requirements to look at energy efficiency. So most companies have started to work towards albeit often undefined reduction goals, and many may have identified at least some of the more obvious opportunities. However, what we tend to find is that this is often done in a fairly unstructured, almost reactive way. And certainly when it comes to things like bigger projects, the ones that should really deliver the more meaty potential savings, when it comes to pushing those through the business for approval, that this is often where many of the main challenges are met. So where to start is always a key issue. Do you actually know the targets? Are they aligned throughout the business? Do you have access to data in order to set baselines and carry out benchmarking exercises, etc.? Can you actually track success? So one of the biggest mistakes organisations tend to make is that they start doing without actually any kind of planning or measuring in the first instance. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough, so you'll have to just bear with me. And then there's obviously the obvious one, which is how are we going to pay for it? So what's the ROI is normally the first question that's always asked. So if I can just offer a little bit of context to all of that, these topics are something that we come across literally every day. And there are a few things that really highlight, I guess, the need to spend that time building a sound business case for efficiency. So if I can just reference an article the CDP pushed out. So the motivation for that article was that the largest global emitters, which make up 50% of the total carbon emissions reported to the CDP, account for a cumulative $447 billion opportunity from climate change. It's massive, and yet half of these companies haven't even qualified that potential yet. So one of the key reasons it's good to see a study like this is that it really highlights facts like this. So over a 5-year period, 62 companies that successfully cut their emissions by 10% or more also saw their revenue increase by that exact same margin. I think this really demonstrates that there's a direct correlation between bottom line performance and the way in which companies control and manage energy efficiency. So in our experience in talking with our customers, we very much see the message that efficiency and managing energy in the right way is actually sometimes an easier way of managing profitability rather than trying to do it through growth in sales, for example. So more and more our clients are seeing a requirement for increased transparency, which I'm sure you're aware of, in how they operate, not only to shareholders and customers anymore, but also really to society in general. So ultimately, potential future customers. And this is just being fueled further by the fact that our world is becoming more and more digital. Certainly, the buying patterns that our customers are seeing strongly suggest that the younger market in particular, they tend to sway towards aligning themselves with the more visibly sustainable companies, certainly in terms of the purchases that they make. And also, and this is probably the key thing here, companies are having to actually look first at reducing costs by way of finding solutions where the savings are effectively paying for the investments. So as we know them, cash neutral activities. The overarching theme that I would say we see, certainly with some of the large companies we work with who are enjoying growth and success, is that energy and sustainability is high on their agenda. So they've got that C-level engagement and are therefore able to really drive this through the business from both a buy-in and also a budget perspective. So even though we're able to provide and highlight many success stories, and there are, that they're numerous, I think it's very clear that we've still got a fair amount of work to do to improve the overall awareness of the importance of energy management and sustainability. And we know that efficiency has been on the radar for a long time, and it definitely is high on a lot of companies' agendas now, but there's still definitely a real gap there between the mindset that's required to actually achieve success in that field and also the kind of running of the day-to-day business, as it were. So the factors as we see them that are preventing companies from achieving those goals, there are a number. In our experience, one of the main issues, and it may seem like a very basic and obvious one, is actually a lack of visibility of the data in the first place, or where it is visible, there's basically just far too much of it. The ability to actually view and analyze that quantity of data in a way that actually allows the business to generate actionable intelligence from it is obviously critical. So it's impossible to create baselines or carry out benchmarking exercises without that data in the first instance. Secondly, what we find is that the decision-making process within an organisation is a massive challenge for people. So everyone's got a different role to play in an organisation, and where you might have an energy manager that's talking in kilowatt hours, you'll also have on the opposite end of the scale, you know, corporate members of the organisation looking at pounds, pence, different drivers, different targets. So there's often also a difference in opinion as to where any focus should sit when it comes to corporate versus site level views, for example. And our customers are reporting this to us regularly as one of their main frustrations. You know, are the targets and goals clear within the organisation? Do they actually even exist? Are they aligned? More often than not, the answer's very much no. Another challenge is the ability to actually see things through. And what I mean by this is we're always surprised by the amount of initiatives and projects that we hear about. They're all full steam ahead in the first instance, and then they gradually kind of just fall off the radar. And that can be down to a number of things. It can be a lack of momentum when implementing them, but primarily it's normally due to not being able to see and therefore quantify the positive effects and impact those changes are having. So again, data comes back to data, and obviously visibility through software. It allows people to kind of start that baselining process, track, and probably most importantly, maintain any savings and efficiencies that people are actually achieving. So without that, the drive to these things just pretty much disappears. So if we look at why those kind of things are happening, I guess we've come to realise that the main driver that creates a project to be implemented or not is around the acceleration of the results that we can actually show to the customer. So every year the expectation is the same. It's to measure in terms of performance, production, also efficiency. And the timing of getting those results is critical. Unfortunately, as we know, it doesn't come naturally. So some of the barriers are pretty complex when it comes to the topic of efficiency. To make sure that any kind of efficiency program can actually move on and resonate on its own, it must be integrated. So it needs to tear down the internal and external silos. Again, resonating with some of the challenges we hear from our customers, where every individual within a business has got different and often conflicting priorities. This then pulls any kind of program in different directions, making it really hard to get those results. Another challenge, in our opinion, and probably one of the key issues we've come to realise, is around development of people. So your employees, your operations personnel, if they're not developed, it just won't work. There's no such thing as efficiency with a non-matured efficiency workforce. So it's really important that every single initiative that you try and take forward, it really focuses on making sure that it's about your people, you know, the behaviour, their skill set, their knowledge about efficiency in general, making sure that that develops and increases as you go through. So all of these things are very common themes in organisations, and like I say, we hear of them every day. So when we look at priorities of the different components of an organisation, again, we find that there's that mix of ambitions and a mix of problems that we need to address. And basically, we all know that efficiency is possible, and every single layer of the organisation recognises the value in this, but it doesn't make it easy to establish that single view and as to what we're going to do to get to that efficiency level. If we take the sustainability view of efficiency, we're looking more at the long-term business, so the long-term view. But when you look at the site or plant manager's view, they want the results, well, now, in the same period that they're going to be measured on, obviously. So these kind of views really need to be brought into the same picture effectively. So if we take a look at the two different layers within the organisation, we recognise that we have what we usually call the corporate layer in the organisation, which is really the entity that's setting the vision. This is focused on the long-term goals being met, making sure that we have all the right deployment tactics, that they've got all the right resources in place, and that really there's a clear strategy to get there. But on the other hand, when we talk about the site level or grassroots level of an organisation, say, this is really about where all the action happens. So it's where the changes need to occur, and it's where the impacts actually need to be measured. The problem that we see, again, daily is that in between these two worlds, there's what we really call the collaborative layer. And this is rarely addressed as a priority when anybody's launching efficiency programs. When we do our efficiency within Schneider, we focus particularly on that layer. So that's really a starting point for us. And it just ensures that you get that efficiency acceleration, the integration, and also the development of the resources that are going to be associated with it. So in terms of one of the things that I get asked more than daily, all around budgets, financing, how are we going to pay for this? So the budgets, resources topic is always the first one to come up in discussion, because ultimately we believe that we don't have the resources, we believe that we don't have the budget. The nice thing I would say about efficiency is that you can actually generate the budget with your actions. So that's probably the differentiator between efficiency, and other topics. Just to explain this a bit more, if you take a look at any efficiency program, the initial standpoint is always going to be that everybody assumes what we need to do is go to the organisation, ask for a huge chunk of money so we can spend it on replacing equipment, for example. And that's obviously going to give you results, but it's going to take some time to make sure that you can actually give that money back to the organisation. And I guess that's where the payback piece kicks in. So if you take a programmatic approach instead, what you start with is the non-capex actions, so the easy things to do first, the behavioural changes, the optimisation of equipment, and all of this needs to be sanctioned by experts, so sanctioned by benchmarked and data-driven decisions. The amount of resource is a lot less to begin with if you do it that way, and the best part of that is that as you go on that journey, you're actually generating cash, you're generating those savings financially that can then be reinvested into a more complex level of project, as we referred to at the beginning. So the resources are not being met as a single standpoint in the beginning. It's through the whole journey that you need to really assemble a plan for budget and resources. In terms of payback, there is a tendency to think that if you have the right payback, so whether it be 12 months or 2 years, that the decision will ultimately get made and your project will be a go. And loads of our customers have told us that just get us 1 or 2 years payback, we'll do it. Unfortunately, we've learned that it is very rarely that simple. So if you're purely taking payback only into account for making your decisions, then you're missing out on one major thing, which is ultimately the time it takes to get to those savings. So if you take any project, even if it's got 1 year payback, for example, but it takes 2 years to start seeing the results, because you've got to jump through all the relevant hoops in the organisation, like get an energy audit, create a development plan, then you've got to do an RFP, then you have to start implementation, look at plant shutdown, etc. And all this time you've got all these opposing views within the business. Operations are saying we can't do that, production is king. Absolutely not. If it takes you 2 years to get all of that in place, then your real time to results, even on a 1 year project, is ultimately 3 years. Whereas if you take maybe a project that's got 1.5 year payback, but it takes you only 6 months to accomplish it, that makes a lot more sense financially, because you're obviously going to see those results in less time than with the first option. So for me, what I would say is the real criteria is not just about the payback. I mean, I should probably say we do always meet that as per any configuration of a program that we work on, but it is key to make sure that your overarching criteria includes the time to get to those results and the overall cash flow through the entire journey. So briefly, just to kind of summarise what we've covered, I'm conscious that we've kind of whizzed through that fairly quickly, but just to summarise some of the key learnings that we recommend that you need to remember when building a business case. So the first thing is just go that bit further. Don't just rely on payback or return on investment alone. Make sure you spend time really understanding and mapping out a strategic plan so you're actually able to act. Use measurements and targets that consider the time to savings and tap into that more extra financial value. Secondly, break down those internal silos and barriers. So overcome the differences of opinion and priorities, include main stakeholders when designing the strategy, and obviously try and ensure that they remain engaged. The third thing, develop those skills within your people. So to get the savings and to sustain those savings, your people have to be developed in terms of efficiency and understanding how it all works. So really focus on developing those skills and impacting behaviour across your organisation ultimately. I think in the next session we'll probably cover a little bit in more detail of how to actually achieve those challenges that we've seen. We recognise that it's not easy, and like I say, it's something that we hear all the time. We get the same messages from our customers, the same frustrations, but I think ultimately you know, they're the kind of key learnings that we would implement in any design of a business case in the first instance. And that's really me for today. I think we're going to move on to any questions. Tom?
Hi Louise, yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. It was very informative and very interesting. We've got a little bit of time left now for some questions. I've had a couple sent through here. The first one says, I'm struggling reconciling different or conflicting agendas and priorities from different areas of the business when I try to get people on board. How can I get people to agree when they have very different agendas?
Okay. Again, yeah, it's a common problem. So every organisation has this. I've not come across one yet that doesn't. And in a nutshell, the answer would be get those people around the same table. So have the face-to-face meetings, you know, get them working as a team from the very beginning. So take away all this blame culture, take away the opposition, increase kind of collaborative working environments as part of the decision-making process. So just ensure that there are opportunities to do that rather than working in, you know, kind of set processes and audits and following manuals and following procedures and everybody working in those silos. Create, you know, the workshop environments, the open forums to actually share information and kind of get that team culture from the very beginning. I would say that that's the kind of key thing to making that work.
Thank you, Louise. Yeah, I've also got another question here, and it goes along the lines of they've started to pull together a business proposal, but they haven't engaged with anyone about it yet. You mentioned in your presentation, obviously, that an important aspect is identifying or engaging with key stakeholders within the organisation, but how do you identify or start to identify the most appropriate people to approach so that your project is successful and you're more likely to get buy-in and sign off on the whole energy efficiency program?
Okay, so it's all around kind of mapping out that route to results. So creating a plan that allows you to visibly see the kind of main milestones in terms of reaching efficiency. So things like, you know, who's involved in setting the targets, who ultimately is involved in planning the strategy, who would implement any kind of projects that you're looking at, who would measure them, you know, and ultimately who are the people and individuals within the organisation that are going to be impacted by the implementation of those projects, but also impacted by the results. And really by going through that process, you kind of establish all of the key individuals that have to really be part of that from the beginning. Otherwise, that's where you're going to face, you know, your opposition and your challenges and your pushback. The biggest one for me that I've seen with companies that I work with is production's always the kind of blocking point. So you can go through all of the planning and, you know, meticulous strategic discussions that you like in the first instance. If the production guys are not part of that, they will just put a block on it. Production is king. Absolutely not. We can't do this. We can't do that. Whereas if you're listening to them in the first instance and really taking on board, you know, the different views within the organisation, then absolutely you've listened, you've got their buy-in, and all of that's been taken into consideration. So you've kind of got your key people through following that process.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, and that obviously really strengthens your business proposal as well, and you can obviously helps to preempt any rebuttal from
Yeah,
internal management, etc., that might come through. So I guess really the more people you can liaise with, the stronger your business case will be.
definitely.
Yeah. And I've got a last one here that we've got time for really is I've calculated the savings potential from my project and included them in my proposal. This person is wary that these savings may simply be seen as a money-making or money-saving exercise rather than being used to reinvest in further initiatives as part of a longer-term strategy. So how can, when you're pitching, or how can you ensure that these savings are seen more in the context of a long-term strategic plan?
Yeah, this definitely goes back to well, two things. Number one, having the key people involved in this process from the outset, but secondly, the long-term strategic plan where everything's mapped out, and the people that and I know it happens, basically, brilliant, you've saved us a load of money, we'll have that, thank you very much, see you later. You need to really demonstrate that, this is what we're going to do from the outset. Firstly, we're going to generate some cash and savings by looking at the easy wins, by looking at optimization, behavioural change, etc. However, we need to reinvest that in order to then capitalize on the bigger projects that are going to generate the big chunk of revenue, savings, etc. So you need to be positioning that bigger picture from the outset and getting the key people to understand that they can't just take the money off you when you've saved a little bit. It needs to be reinvested back in for those bigger, more strategic projects that are ultimately going to get you to your goals.
Yeah, I guess it also sort of feeds back into what you were saying at the beginning about energy efficiency is fortunately one of those things which is self-funding in a way. It's self-perpetuating. It's not necessarily something that should be seen as like a chunk of upfront capital costs. It could almost look after itself, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the projects that we work on, well, all of the projects that we work on, I would say now are cash neutral or cash positive in position.
Yeah.
But obviously, I'm also aware that there's been projects that have been started and the business takes the savings before they have chance to reinvest. So it's really key to have that long-term plan in place.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And even when projects are cash neutral from the outset, or would appear to be cash neutral, even cash positive, doesn't necessarily mean that companies see it as a business opportunity.
No, absolutely.
It doesn't actually always get people to implement whatever you're trying to implement. So that's really good. Thank you very much for that, Louise. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in to listen to this. As a reminder again, if you do have any questions which you want to ask or come up later, then please always feel free to email me, your community manager, Tom, or Pamela, and we will get back to you. So once again, on behalf of Louise and I, thank you for joining us for this webinar for the members of the GSK Supplier Exchange, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.